Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Huck. Today I am doing a review for Circe by Madeline Miller. This is a reimagining of the character of Circe from Greek mythology. Circe is an immortal titan and a witch who shows up in a lot of different myths, but as far as I know, she doesn't have a story just to herself. And so what Madeline Miller has done is taken all of these bits and pieces about Circe and all of these myths that she's interacted with and woven them together into a narrative about this character so we get to learn more about Circe. This book is incredibly well done and incredibly well written. I think that it does a really good job of giving a lot of context to the character of Circe, but also other characters and other myths and monsters, and we get to learn so much about the origins. I have loved Greek mythology for a long time. I was a classical studies minor in college, so I'm not the most well-versed on all things Greek, but I have a basis of understanding, but I really loved how this gave a lot of backstory and connection to different stories that I hadn't really been aware of before, and it kind of re-inspired me to research some of this stuff again, because I haven't read a lot of mythology recently, and there were characters and stories that then I went and looked up and read about again because I had forgotten about them, or I hadn't realized that these characters were connected, or I just re-inspired my interest in Greek mythology. And this book does a really great job of weaving them all together. Some of the stories and connections are embellishment because there isn't a ton of information about Circe, but a lot of it is from actual mythology, and I loved that it created this context for the world, for these characters that I hadn't really known about before. This story also provides some interesting perspective on different characters. It has a very different take on some very well-known and well-loved characters from mythology, so I really appreciated that it didn't just regurgitate information that we already know about some of the more prominent characters. It really made them feel like people. It gave us a new perspective. It kind of fleshed them out. One of my favorite parts of this book was also Circe's reflections on humanity and mortality. So Circe is an immortal titan, and her lifespan is very different from a human mortal lifespan. And I loved seeing the way that she viewed humans and her reflections on the way that immortality affects people versus mortality, and how it affects how you are as a person and how you relate to the world, how you relate to others. I also appreciated that she was treated as an immortal. I think that a lot of times in stories when we have immortal beings, they are viewed through a lens of human time and mortal time, and this was very much viewed through the lens of an immortal. The human lifetimes are just a blip to her, and so we would span hundreds of years, but to her it didn't feel that long because she is immortal. She's not living in human time. Another strength of this book is definitely Circe's growth over the course of the book. She really changes over the course of the story. She grows as a person. She learns more about herself. She becomes much more self-aware, which is something that I really appreciate in a character, is when they have that self-awareness. She becomes a more self-reflective character over time, and I think that her growth is one of the things that was most interesting to me as I was reading this, because she does change a lot, but it makes sense. It's not the kind of flip a switch kind of change. You can see how her experiences throughout her lifetime have affected this change, and I love seeing real growth in a character, and that is one of the things that I find most interesting in a character as I read their story. It is a very quotable book. There are so many passages and lines that I underlined and that I would then quote to people and be like, listen to this, you need to, this is such a great like phrase or line, or like, isn't that so interesting? So it's a very quotable book. I think that the writing is very well done. While I was reading this book, I actually kind of had like an accidental book club while I was reading it, because without any, you know, prompting from me, my dad had actually read this book. He found it without knowing that I was going to read it, and he absolutely loved it, and then was like, you need to read this so we can talk about it. So I read it. He also got my mom to read it, and so we were able to discuss it as we were moving through the book and reading it. And I think that this is a really great book for a book club, for a buddy read, for discussion. There's so much in it to really dig into, and as I was saying, it is so quotable. There are so many great lines in it. I just think that there's so much to talk about, so much to dig into, and it would really be an ideal book for a book club or a discussion. One of the things that we discussed was also that the first half of the book and the second half of the book are kind of different. The first half has a wider scope. It's more focused on that world building and the context building, telling you more about how and why the world is the way it is and how all of these myths are connected. The second half of the book focuses in a little bit more on individuals and relationships. So personally, I liked the second half of the book better, because that's what I like to read about. Is I like those smaller stories about individuals and relationships. But as I was talking to my dad about this book, the first half of the book was his favorite part of it, because he loves that large scope world building, context building kind of explanation part of it. So that's another reason that I think that this would be a really interesting one to have as a book club pick, because it has a bit of something for everyone. I think that this book can appeal to lots of different people, and my dad and I don't always agree on books. He reads fantasy also, but we don't always agree because we like different things. He's more interested in the world building, and I'm more interested in the like character development and relationships. But we were both able to enjoy this and discuss it, and it really did have something for both of us to really appreciate in it. So as much as I thought this book was very, very well done, I did have a couple of things that I wasn't a huge fan of. One for me was just the perspective that it was written in. So this is written in first person, and this is just a personal preference that I'm not a huge fan of first person as a writing perspective. I have read books that are in first person and I loved them, but it's definitely a more hit or miss writing style for me. But this kind of created a little bit of a gap for me between the book and myself, and it just kind of wasn't as smooth a reading experience for me because it was in first person. But as I said, that's not necessarily a fault of the book, that's just a personal preference for this. Another problem that I had with it was maybe because of that first person perspective, I don't know exactly why, but I didn't feel a real emotional connection to the character Circe, to this story, and that is something that is very important to me when reading a book. I know that from other people that I've talked to and other reviews that I've seen, a lot of people do feel that emotional connection to her, but personally it just wasn't there for me. So while I thought that this book was so well done, and I thought it was really interesting and really great to discuss, I just didn't have that like love of it and that like emotional personal connection to it. Also, before I wrap up, I just want to say that I would put a warning on this for sexual assault and rape, and also just all kinds of violence. But overall, I did think that this book was very well done, and I would recommend it, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. So that is all for my review of Circe by Madeline Miller. Let me know in the comments if you have read this book, what you thought of it, if you agree or disagree with what I said about it. Thank you all for watching, and until next time, bye!